Welcome into Triple Zeros. I'm your host, Josh Buckhalter. Follow me on Twitter at JoshGBuck. Hit up the Facebook page, Clocker Sports, the website, clockersports.com, and the email address is clockersports@gmail.com. You can also find me anywhere at 30spod. That's Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. That's at the number 30 and pod. You know what we like to do here, man. I like to talk sports, but every once in a while I get tired of hearing my own damn voice, so I have to bring on a guest. And I'm happy as all get out to bring back a guest who's been here before. It's been some time, though, and I'm going to tell you how much time it's been. Last time I spoke with Brad Spielberger, first of all, his Twitter handle was Brad OTC. It's now Brad PFF. He became a lawyer, and the man got married. Like, some of us really maximized the quarantine, so I want you to just understand that not everybody was as boring as me and just talking to themselves for these past few months. So with that being said, Brad, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, man. That's what's up, man. Congratulations on all that you've accomplished. Like I said, that's a lot of stuff going on with everybody else basically just sitting at home. But I want to get into a lot of stuff we've seen. Now, last time you were here, we went over a bevy of topics, mostly financial related, obviously, with your work over the cap at that time. And when I was going back through the interview, first thing, one of the things that stuck out to me was we both kind of jumped on the Bengals and their cornerback deal. They had to, but you specifically mentioned Trey Waynes and how much they overpaid for him. We see the results of that defense. Do you think that there's some buyer's remorse here, or do you think they're just kind of like chalking this one up as a wash because of how awful everything else is gone? Mm.
Everywhere this year. He's all over the field. He's been dominant. William Jackson III, who's their other outside corner, has been solid. He was a great rookie and kind of has fizzled a little bit in recent years, had some injuries, but he's been good. But they're just not a good team, like all over the defense. Obviously, Carlos Dunlap wanted to get out of there as badly as possible and force the trade. He was selling his house on Twitter. So they just show that you kind of, if you have some good pieces but some really big weak links still, they have some young linebackers. They have a very young and inexperienced, edge rushers at this point. It's tough.
Now, we also talked about Jamie Collins in Detroit, and we mentioned how that was probably going to be a bad idea for a few reasons, not the least of which was just the Patriots going elsewhere tends to not work out. Now, we've seen how that ultimately ended up in Detroit. Matt Patricia's gone. Bob Quinn is out. Do you think that they try to move on from some of those guys, or is Jamie Collins stuck there? And because I'm really asking for a question that I'll get to back down the road, but what do you think this stands with how Detroit attacked free agency this season?
It's actually a good question because they really did. They bought into bringing in old Patriots more than even Bob Quinn, the GM, and Matt Patricia, the coach, who are no longer there, obviously, are former Patriots for about 15 years. So that is what happens generally with a new GM and a new regime. And it does sound like Detroit is really going to kind of overhaul the entire organization. But what happens often is that they're not attached to any of the players. And in a situation like Detroit, I would say it's a good thing. They're not in a great cap situation. They have Kenny Galladay is going to be a free agent who's going to command, probably $20 million a year, plus he hasn't played much this year, but when he does, he's clearly, an elite wide receiver. Stafford getting near the end of his deal. So you start to look, give him more money or you move on. So I think a new GM could come in there and really could clean house if they wanted to.
No, and you know what? That's kind of what you want at any given moment is that your next guy can, I don't want to say make up for the mistakes, but kind of just, make up for the mistakes of the previous regime. That's something that we here in Chicago are probably going to be dealing with the opposite side. So that's not necessarily a great thing. One of the other things that you said, though, you said you liked the Cleveland Browns offseason and how they attack things. And to be honest with you, while they're sitting here at 9-3, I have a hard time finding any fault with what you said. What have you been most impressed about with what the Browns have gotten done?
Yeah, not to like toot my own horn at all, because I think the one area, I loved what they did on the offensive line, but it's even exceeded my expectations. It really has. The linchpin there has been Wyatt Teller, who they traded actually from the Bills for a 5th-round pick, I want to say, 2 years ago, or no, excuse me, last year in 2019. And he's been, I mean, he's one of the best guards, if not the best guard in football. And so when you're in a run game like Cleveland's, Stefanski, zone running scheme, a lot of play action stuff like that. When you get a road grader, just a mauler like Teller is, it allows Jack Conklin, who was their big right tackle signing this offseason. He's good in the run game, but I think they kind of want more, pass protection from him. And he's able to kind of lean on that when he has the best run blocking, guard in football playing next to him. So it just made the whole offensive line is so cohesive. Jedrick Wills, their rookie, 11th overall pick out of Alabama, has been fantastic. It's crazy for him, too. He's playing right tackle last year. They move him over to left tackle. So not only does he go from, switches sides of the line, first year in the NFL, shortened off season, new head coach in Kevin Stefanski, and he still at left tackle has been really good. So he obviously could be special. So yeah, they've been good.
And they've got the best offensive line names in the NFL. Teller, you got Wills, you got Conklin. That's offensive lineman names right there. Okay, that's
totally agree.
Like. Now, I said that last time we spoke, I said that I like the Brady and the Rivers deals to bring those Hall of Famers down to their respective teams. Who do you think is winning those? Battle right now? Do you think it's Indianapolis with how Rivers is playing, or do you think it's Brady because of the ceiling? I think the ceiling on the Buccaneers is higher.
I agree with you. I still think it's Brady. Obviously, I think the Colts have a one-game lead now if you look at their records. But I think Brady's been a better player this year. It really is incredible. I mean, he is falling off a little bit. Like, he is showing some signs, but he really still isn't when you compare him to the other. And he's 43, whereas Rivers, I want to say, is 39, which is still old, of course. But that's a big gap. I mean, 4 years is not a small gap of years. But yeah, so Rivers, to me, when you throw the film on, the decline is more noticeable. I think he's just like, they're both statues in the pocket, but Rivers even more so. Just like, he can't, if pressure comes, like, the play is just over. And I think you just see him just miss some things as well. Whereas Brady hasn't been perfect by any stretch. They're obviously in a huge slump right now. But I think we'll see them coming out of the bye. I think they're going to look really good this weekend. I think they're going to right the ship, get everything back on track. I'll be honest with you. I think Frank Reich is a much better coach than Bruce Arians in Tampa Bay. I do.
I agree with you on that 100%. I think he might be a better coach than Doug Peterson in Philly as well. One of the things that I did notice, now you were just talking about how Rivers is younger, but he hasn't looked great this year. I think what we're seeing is that because Indianapolis is kind of still built on a budget, like they're getting kind of high price, but they're still kind of bargain basement on the skill positions. You're kind of seeing that Rivers doesn't have the ability to overcome that, right? Whereas Brady kind of just needs everything to work together. It's not that he can't get it done, but he needs things to be clicking and humming, and we clearly see that's not happening right now in Tampa. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think that Colts are doing better right now, record-wise, but ultimately I think Brady will be the one who comes out on top. Now, both of us were smartly bashing Houston for their trade of DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson. We see how that turned out for Bill O'Brien. What's up with Houston, man? What are they going to do? Because they're up against the cap, too, and they made so many bad trades right before they fired O'Brien.
It's a crazy situation, man, because I think, yes, so they not only have little cap space, no first or second round pick this year, but the thing is, Deshaun Watson is incredible. I mean, he looks so good that if you're, everyone has been asking me lately, kind of like, how would you rank the GM openings? How do you view them? And, just because of who I am and what I do, when I see a team that has, 2 first round picks and one of them is going to be Trevor Lawrence, like, I'm obviously going to think it's that. But the crazy thing is that we see year after year, time after time with GMs that if you don't have the quarterback, like, nothing else really matters at the end of the day. I mean, obviously.
You didn't have to take a shot at Ryan Pace like that.
I mean, but that's the thing. I mean, and everyone keeps comparing him kind of like to Dave Caldwell, who just got fired in Jacksonville, because Dave Caldwell also actually drafted really well. Drafted a lot of good defensive players. He drafted a lot of players in late rounds, but ultimately Bortles, it didn't matter. They couldn't find a quarterback, and so they had the one run, but it didn't really matter. And so if you're a GM, you definitely look at Houston and say, well, I'm not really going to be able to do anything in the immediate future, but I have the most difficult, impossible thing, is set. I have the quarterback. He's a clear franchise quarterback. He's 26 years old. He's already signed, so I don't have to deal with that. Like, it makes it so attractive. So that one I think is going to go to a vet. I think we're going to see an established, like, I don't want to call it a retread because, it shouldn't be a guy that doesn't deserve, but I think we're going to see someone who has NFL experience and who they trust to kind of just like make sure just don't screw it up, as opposed to like make it great. Just don't mess it up.
Now you mentioned Jacksonville, and that's funny. You mentioned that's my next point. We talked about how they and the Rams were going to be teams. Well, you mentioned there were going to be teams that were trying to get ahead of the financial crunch that was coming. We saw both of them make some deals to shed some salary. Rams brought in some other guys. Clearly, they're going in opposite directions despite facing some similar challenges. Is there any way the Jazz can turn this around to become more like the Rams? They're not going to be the Rams, obviously, but can they become more like the Rams, or are they kind of stuck in this cycle for a couple more years?
Well, yeah, just because earlier I was patting myself on the back, I'll take a big L on the Rams. No, I mean, really, I really did not see this from the Rams. I have to be honest. I said that far and wide. I mean, I didn't think they were going to be bad. Like, I didn't think they were going to, go 5-11 or anything. But
right.
I thought they were like a 500 football team. Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Jaguars is I think that they're pretty close, which probably sounds crazy, but with the amount of assets they have, like they could, if they have two good off seasons, basically, and if Justin Fields is good, I mean, they could be contending in 2022. Like it's funny that we talk about sometimes, like you and I have discussed, these rebuilds and getting ahead of the game and stuff like that. The thing about it is if you do it smartly, you can turn a team around in like 2 off seasons. Like you really can. So yes, it sounds insane for me to say that the Jaguars could be the Rams soon, but they could if they get. I mean, the variable there is Sean McVay is a special coach, so that's the one thing that you gotta, good luck with that. But from a personnel standpoint, they could be there soon.
You nailed it, because if they had Deshaun Watson down there, they're a contender, and they're a dangerous team with the skill position that they have out there. I like Chenault. I like Chark. I like James Robinson, came out of nowhere to be a stud this year. The defense can be better when they get some more seasoning, so I agree with you there. I want to talk about another team we talked about financial trouble. Well, 2 more, but I want to focus on one. We also mentioned Philly and New Orleans. Philly in particular, though, with Carson Wentz being benched and Jalen Hurts being named the starter, what are they going to do there? Because they're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't in terms of trying to move him. Wentz, that is.
This is one of the biggest nightmare scenarios we'll probably ever see, covering this sport, because what the Eagles basically did is, so Carson Wentz technically was, as a 2016 draft pick, technically this year was his 5th-year option season. So again, not as cheap as a rookie deal, of course, but still cheap. So this was supposed to be them, this was them basically attacking the last quote unquote window to where they had an elite quarterback in their minds that was on that had a cap hit in that particular season of, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not, it's about to jump to 40 next year or whatever it is. And right now it's probably 20, 25. So for this to go this poorly, I mean, it's a nightmare. The answer to the question of what they do is I have no idea. Like that. I mean, Hurts. I do think that we all lauded the pick, and we didn't expect it to come to see it happen this quickly. But maybe they get bailed out by Hurts being good enough to kind of galvanize the team. Maybe they still somehow make an NFC East run. And then you have some, momentum going into 2021. But I'll be honest, it's a situation that you probably won't see very often, where things just go as bad as possible.
Yeah, I've seen that their asking price for Wentz too is like a late first and an early second. I'm not seeing them getting a late first just because teams will know what kind of situation that they're in and what kind of deal they have to take on. So unless Bill O'Brien gets hired somewhere and he decides to trade a stud for him, I don't see them being able to move that deal without trying to restructure it in some way. That's a case study in not being too aggressive on a small sample size for fear of alienating somebody. Because wasn't this partially at least done in response to the overwhelming support for Nick Foles? So they wanted to kind of make Wentz feel at ease.
I mean, it may have been. There was obviously some anxiety there and some stress with that situation, and maybe we're seeing it again with them taking Hurts in the second round. Which, I mean, personally, I'm hard on people, but I say, I mean, that just proves to me he's not the guy. If the team taking a backup for you is gonna give you, then you probably don't have the mental fortitude potentially. I don't want to speak that point. Maybe it could be very wrong. It could be Hurts.
You're right.
Go ahead.
It's two pronged though, because if them drafting a backup ruins you mentally, then you were never that strong. But also, if they feel the need to draft a backup at that position, at that high in the draft, you might need to take heed of some of the red flags. So, I mean, you're not wrong by saying that clearly that just feels that the sentiment there might not be that he's the guy.
That's what keeps turning over my head is that, so I do genuinely believe that I think that because of the cap situation we're just talking about, I genuinely think part of the draft pick was we'll get a above average backup quarterback on a cheap deal. But secondly, I do think it's fair to wonder if that's not what the motivation was. And the motivation was, this Carson guy, he missed like 12 games last year, and then he hurt his back and his neck again, in 2019 or 20. Like, maybe they really did think, they didn't foresee this coming, this
Right.
bad of a season, but maybe they did think he was on the decline, and Hurts was not as random of a pick as we may think. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, listen, a guy like Hurts with his skill set is definitely a pick. The attention that it received, right? Because he came in with a name of his own. So that was not a move that was to be taken lightly. I don't think that it should have broken Wentz like this if that is what indeed what's happening here. But it definitely wasn't nothing. So I don't think there's really an overreaction here, but it definitely is a case of Philly kind of screwing the pooch here because they're stuck, like I said, no matter what they do, and that's tough.
No, 100%. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're good. One of the other things I want to talk about before we talk about some more local stuff, Christian McCaffrey's deal. We talked about this and how the Panthers kind of went against the common knowledge here, common thought processes, and paid him that hefty deal. And I told you, 300 plus touch guys get hurt. What happened? CMC's broken down. Now, you combine that with the Teddy Bridgewater deal that you did not like, and where do you see Carolina in the ranking, in the hierarchy of the NFC South?
Yeah, so their offseason is interesting. I didn't like that. I felt as though they were spending money when it was just unnecessary because I think what I said in your podcast is probably like there's 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks that are like about to retire in your division. So why not just maybe wait a year? I will say again, I'll take a small L on some of that because like the Robbie Anderson deal looks fantastic. And I think it was smart to you don't have to do nothing just because you can't compete. So, but again, I mean, the running back deals, this is what happens. I mean, we see this every single time. This is just like it's the nature of the position that it's unfortunate, but it's the nature of the position. Now it looks like he was about to come back to practice and got re-injured again, or maybe be a different injury. So, I mean, Mixon's missed almost the entire season. He signed just before the season started. Again, and obviously guys get hurt other positions, but yeah, I mean, that's what you expect there. As for the Teddy deal, at this point, I think it was probably smart to just establish your team, your offense, your identity, to get reps for Curtis Samuel, find out who Curtis Samuel is. Like he might get extended now, whereas before the season, I would have told you there's no chance. Yeah, he might get traded. So having a good enough quarterback was smart to just kind of let your offensive line grow, let your receivers grow, let all that grow. But I'll tell you right now, if they don't take a quarterback in this draft, I'd be pretty surprised.
No, I'd be shocked too. You gotta at least plan for the future somewhat. I like Teddy as a player, but I agree with you wholeheartedly there. Let's switch our gears real quick before we wrap up and talk about the NFC North because we kind of hit on everybody. We didn't really talk about the Packers, but we didn't say the Packers are going to be this good, but we knew they'd be good. Minnesota, and I know they hold a special place in your heart. Did you expect them? You said they would maintain. Now, they didn't start off great, but did you foresee at any point in time they'd be able to make the kind of comeback that they've made in the past month or so?
So yeah, the 1-5 start was crazy, and not to again. I think it was. I wouldn't say it's crazy. I think it should be expected because I think they just had so much turnover, and you had to think there were growing pains. But if you go back and look at it, I mean, they lost to Tennessee on like a 50-yard field goal at the buzzer, so they could have beaten the Titans in like week 3, and then they went down to Seattle or out west of Seattle and lost that game on like the last snap of the game too. So. It's actually great, but yeah. So I almost didn't see this comeback coming more so because I thought they maybe would lose motivation and kind of just because of the pandemic and all that. Like you started at 1-5 when you had high hopes. I thought maybe just from a mental perspective, emotional perspective, they lose it, but that's not what Mike Zimmer's about. And he's got them playing pretty good football now. So it's I mean, you look at Cam Dantzler and Justin Jefferson, their emergence the last 6 weeks or whatever, maybe 8 weeks. It's incredible. And this is what we discussed. Like, I didn't think they were going to contend this year. I don't think, I think they now could sneak in the playoffs, but I'm not going to tell you like they're a hot name that, no one wants to play the Vikings. Like, I'm not going to say that.
Right.
But the 2021 Vikings, like, could be a very, very good football team.
Yeah, no, and you know what? I was surprised. Jefferson's a stud. I was one of the people who was kind of down on the Vikings, because Mike Zimmer has this weird habit, and if you go back and look, he's had up and down years. It's alternated his tenure in Minnesota. This was scheduled to be a down year. He could still finish 8-8 or whatever, and it'd be that way, but I did not see them having the fortitude to come back like this, mostly because I didn't believe in Kirk Cousins, who they extended before the season, to be able to keep things together, right? To be able to rally the troops back. He's done that. Now, he hasn't played great. He's had some bad games too, but the fact that, like you said, they haven't fallen apart despite having all that turnover is commendation for me. The next team I want to talk about, I'm just going to briefly discuss it because it's a segue to the grand scheme of this entire thing. I dogged the Lions last time we spoke, and I have to put out a mea culpa. You've been taking your L's. I got to take my L on this one because I literally on the pod said that you expect to lose to the Packers or the Packers to be good. You expect the Vikings to compete, and nobody worries about the Lions. Well, damn it, that bit me in the butt because the Bears decided to blow a 10-point lead to the Lions. So my question is really about the Bears. Does this mean, like, is it official now the Bears are our little brother in the NFC North?
Oh, that's tough. No, I think honestly it's crazy, but look at all the teams after a coach gets fired, like how they've all performed this year. And I'm not sure I've ever seen in my entire life. I really don't think I've seen this before. Where, I mean, did you see a single former player of Matt Patricia's tweet like anything like,
Nothing
"Yeah, I learned a lot." Like, not once, because nothing nice. Like, you saw Darius Slay and like all the former guys, but I'm saying like even you'll see a coach get fired that like everyone hates or we hear that everyone hates, and you'll still see some guys tweet like, I know it didn't end well, but I appreciate, he believed in me, he helped me develop. Like, you don't see any, exactly. Nice, right, and like you don't see any of that. Like, so I still think that the Lions just organizationally, and I mentioned before, they apparently, it sounds like their new owner, it's same family, but a new person's in charge. Sounds like they're taking it a little bit more. Yeah. Sounds like they're a little more seriously than they want. But until that happens, they're the little brother. But if they really overhauled the whole organization, we talk about the Bears and we'll get to the Bears, but we're concerned that Ryan Pace has too much on his plate. And based on what I've read and some of the conversations I've had, their GM was in charge of everything, like just too much. And so if they're going to go ahead and actually overhaul the whole, then we'll discuss it. But for now, we can be safe and say that the Lions are still the little brother at this moment.
Okay, good. Thank you, because I was feeling really bad. Now, you just recently, speaking of GMs, you just released an article for PFF, Pro Football Focus, about the qualities of a good NFL general manager and candidates to monitor for the 2020 offseason. Brad, this article came out right on time. I am citing it multiple times in my article on the Bears for this week about how, let's get a little bit meatheadish. Now, you've listed some great candidates in here. I'm not going to knock the list at all. There are some Chiefs. There's a Chiefs organization member and a Saints organization member, and simply because of Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, those guys are out for me. I know those guys might be great on their own, but I can't go back to that well right now. I do like your suggestions, specifically from the Ravens, Joe Ortiz and Ed Dodds from the Indianapolis Colts, especially Dodds because he has the assistant general manager role. Did you have, if you were picking for the Bears, hiring for the Bears, do you have a particular candidate here that would fit best?
It's a great question, and I appreciate the shout out. Definitely, yeah, it's a great resource. We're going to keep adding to it. There's more names coming. I've been doing some kind of research on their actual success and all that, so keep an eye out for that. But I mean, Ed Dodds, I think, is just his track record is just phenomenal. I mean, was with the Seahawks from 2007 to 2016, I want to say, and just kept moving up the ladder, higher and higher. Gets a lot of credit for basically helping build the Legion of Boom and all of that. And they were the best, just different research, but the Seahawks were the best drafting team of the last 15 years, and he was there for a decade. So then you jump over to Indianapolis 2017, and they've been they've been great in the draft since. They've been smart strategy-wise. They trade back a lot, but they still do trade up. They're allowed to trade up, or they're enabled to trade up because they trade back so much. And they're smart. I mean, they make good picks. And then finally, I mean, just from an organizational standpoint, like we're talking about Zimmer keeping the Vikings on track. I mean, they have Andrew Luck retire out of nowhere, and him and Ballard just. I mean, I'm sure they had a phone call where they said, "What the f do we do?" But very quickly after that, they got everything on track. There was no sense of panic. There was no sense of like, oh, we're screwed. They just moved forward, and they're a playoff contender this year. Still a really young team, still growing every year. So yeah, I mean, to me, I think Ed Dodds is probably like candidate one A, 1B.
Okay, that's good. See, I'm glad that I picked up on something that you also feel the same way about. So that's cool. There's another candidate here that you mentioned that I feel is like my meathead perfect pick. If I was being a meathead fan to the core, I would probably hire him. Louis Riddick. And I would pick him if I was just, thinking rationally too, but I know that as a fan, I would love to have Louis Riddick because I've seen him a lot. I've heard him speak on Football Matters and break down things in real time. So as a fan, that's comforting because, a lot of it is unknown. We don't know what to expect. With him, you get that. Would you, if the Bears were to hire Riddick, would you have any concern that he wouldn't do what's necessary in terms of like moving on from Matt Nagy or something like that because they have a relationship?
So I'll tell you, this is a fun one because I guess kind of stubbornly, I thought that everyone was in love with Riddick just because he was like, a great analyst and is good on ESPN and like you said, breaks down film in a great way, like all these things. And so when I first started doing it, I was like, is he actually, in the article, I spoke to a handful of people. One of the people I spoke with said like that Riddick was the smartest person they'd ever worked with. And this person worked for, I want to say 4 or 5 teams over like a decade. So that really, really got me excited. Now looking at his track record in Philly, it was good. I mean, he was director of pro personnel. He worked his way up pretty quickly. No, I would have no reservations. And coming into it, I thought I would, excuse me, because I hear you on the loyalty stuff and all that, but I think that's just him being a good friend and a good person on TV. Like, I don't think Mike Mayock, once he got to the Raiders, was still like being nice to people, just because he, had a good rapport and stuff like that. So the Nagy element is interesting because, he has 2 years left in his deal and Pace only has 1. So while I think both are gone, I think there is a scenario where maybe they fire Pace and let the new GM make the decision of whether they want to keep Nagy or not. So maybe that does come into play a bit, and we'll see. But Riddick, whatever. Riddick on his own, I would be very excited about as a GM for the Bears based on everything I heard from a lot of people.
Real quick, how does the assistant director of player personnel for the Chicago Bears make this list?
Champ Kelly is impressive. Champ Kelly's what he did in Denver was really, really impressive. And then he also just has a great background he was a coach. He was in a league I've never even heard of. I think I made it into the article.
Right.
Like he
UIF,
won a chip.
I had to look it up.
Oh yeah. But he's been a hot name for a while. He got some interviews last year. I would say one thing, I know you were probably half kidding, but I would say one thing that I heard over and over and over again was, do not think that kind of who's responsible for what thing in each building. And you'll see candidates come out sometimes and you might scratch your head like, how is this guy a top candidate? Not to throw like a guy on the bus, but another name on the list was John Spytek from the Buccaneers, who, if you look at some of his draft history of the teams he was on, like he was there with the Browns when they were like terrible at drafting, but that was not him. He was not high enough in the organization where right. Or as far as we know, it wasn't him. So anyways, long story short, if you look at Champ Kelly, I would tell you if you wanted to try to parse out what his job is, his background is pro scouting and pro personnel first. If you look at an offseason like this offseason, throw away Jimmy Graham, throw away Robert Quinn, because that's the GM's decision. The guys that Champ found are Barkevious Mingo, are Tashawn Gibson, are all these like cheap guys that are playing really well. Like that's at least I would assume.
All the bargains that Ryan Pace has been getting credit for, basically.
Sometimes, no, and some can be Pace, but like, so that's the thing is you don't know. So for all you know, Champ Kelly is the best veteran minimum signing guy in the NFL. But yeah, so anyways, I heard his name from a lot of people consistently that he was great. And the last piece to that as well is I've also been told I think we have the perception that the GM should be the top scout. And I'll tell you, Ryan Pace is the top scout, and I think he is a good scout. I think he's a great talent evaluator. But there's an example of
guys, though.
Yeah, and exactly. So there's an example of where you made the top scout the GM, and it didn't work. So Champ might also just be a guy who's a great leader, and people would just trust to run an organization.
Thank you very much. So last one before I get you out here, I think that if the Bears do part from Matt Nagy, the perfect replacement for him would be Jim Harbaugh. Tell me why I'm crazy.
Interesting. So I came out today. I mean, I'll tell you you're crazy just because it's like it's so crazy because it's so Bears, like former Bear, like ground and pound, like he's yeah. You set up the meathead. You really got the meathead like trail going. But yeah, but it's funny though. I don't hate it as much as other people do, simply because he didn't call plays on offense or defense in San Francisco. His brother John does not do that in Baltimore. Bill Belichick hasn't called a play in a game in a long time. I think Harbaugh would be kind of your field general, your head coach that is just a leader of men. And so if he builds a staff around him of a bunch of hot name coordinators, why would you not get excited about that? You know what I mean?
And there you go. I think he's perfect because he understands the city, the tradition, the misery we've gone through. He can work with quarterbacks. We've seen that. And people, the reason why it ended in San Fran was because he couldn't get along with Trent Baalke. We see how that ended up. But if you get a guy, like I said, like Louis Riddick, who we know can schmooze because of his TV background, I think that could work well. So, I mean, I was expecting you to call me a lot crazier. I'm glad to know that I'm not certifiably insane. Brad Spielberger, thank you so much for joining me again here on Triple Zeros. Please follow him on Twitter at BradPFF. And what else do you have coming out that we should be looking out for?
Dude, thank you so much for having me on again. This is fun. Definitely recap and go back through what we talked about the last time. Always a good time coming on. We always have good conversations. A lot of stuff coming out that's going to be about the 2021 draft. And, you mentioned it was right on time. The GM article was not by accident. It's obviously starting to be that time of year where openings are happening and where interviews are going to start to roll in. So I would say, yeah, like I'm already focused on free agency, the big name signings, the draft, and kind of, what next year is going to look like. But of course, always a little bit of coverage of this year as well.
He is Brad Spielberger. You can find him on Pro Football Focus on Twitter at BradPFF. Brad, thank you for joining me. This is going to do it for this episode of Triple Zeros. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at Josh G. Buck. The Facebook page is Clocker Sports. Website, clockersports.com. Email address, clockersports@gmail.com. And, of course, you can find the podcast everywhere that you can get your podcast and on social media anywhere at 30pod. That's the number 30pod. That's going to do it. You already know what it is, man. I'm gone.